My parents always loved my brother more than me. I was always second. I was always the shadow in my family, the one overlooked, while my younger brother basked in the light. From the time we were kids, it was clear who the favorite was. My parents never even tried to hide it. My brother, just 10 months younger than me, was treated like a golden child. And I, despite my best efforts, always I second best. It didn't matter that I was the one who excelled in school, who worked tirelessly to maintain perfect grades. It was Jared, my brother, who got all the praise, all the love. We were close in age, so my parents enrolled us in school together. This meant that Jared and I were always in the same grade, competing directly with each other. But despite this, I always came out on top, whether it was academics, sports, or anything else. I was better than him at everything, but it never seemed to matter. Jared was the one my parents fawned over. Maybe it was because he was the more social one, always talking about his dreams of becoming a renowned microbiologist, while I was more introverted, focused on my goal of attending Caltech to study data science. My parents' favoritism became more apparent as we grew older. Around my junior year of high school, I had a feeling I might get into Caltech. I worked hard for it, not just because it was my dream, but because I wanted to prove to my parents that I was worth their attention too. So I sat down with them, had what I thought was a fair conversation, and they assured me they would cover my college fees. It wouldn't be difficult for them. After all, my father ran a successful business, and money wasn't an issue. They had been endowed with wealth from the start, and it seemed like an easy promise for them to keep. But as the time for college applications approached, I started to feel uneasy. My parents had always promised to take care of my college expenses, but they were also the same people who had always favored Jared. Despite my doubts, I continued to believe them. I didn't apply for jobs or internships to save up for college, trusting that they would keep their word. The day my acceptance letter from Caltech arrived, I was ecstatic. I had worked so hard for this moment, and it was finally here. But my joy was short-lived. When I told my parents the news, expecting them to share in my excitement, they did a complete 180. They told me they wouldn't be paying for my college after all. Not because they couldn't afford it, but because Jared hadn't gotten into his dream school, Cornell. They wanted me to attend a mediocre college with him, so he wouldn't feel bad about himself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted me to give up my dream, the dream I had worked so hard for, just to protect Jared's feelings. I refused, of course. There was no way I was going to let my parents' favoritism ruin my future. But they were adamant. If I didn't agree to their terms, they wouldn't pay for my college education at all. I felt betrayed. They had been promising me for years that they would support me, only to turn their backs on me when it mattered most. I had always known they favored Jared. But this was a new low. I couldn't stay in that house any longer, knowing that my parents didn't care about my future. So I packed my bags and left. I went to my uncle's house, the one family member who had always been on my side. I told him everything, how my parents had lied to me, how they were trying to force me into a school I didn't want to go to just to spare Jared's feelings. He was furious. He didn't show it. Instead, he told me he would take care of everything. He promised to pay for my college tuition, no strings attached. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. My uncle was a dentist, and he made a good living, but paying for my tuition was still a significant financial burden. Yet he didn't hesitate. He wanted to make sure I had the future I deserved, even if my parents didn't. I've been in college for a year now, and I haven't spoken to my parents since I left. They haven't tried to contact me either, and I guess that's for the best. I don't want anything to do with them after what they did to me. I've been focusing on my studies, doing everything I can to succeed and prove to myself that I don't need them. But last week, out of the blue, my parents showed up at my college. I was shocked. They hadn't spoken to me in a year, and now they were here, trying to make amends. They apologized for everything, saying they wanted to make things right. I was suspicious, of course. Why now? Why after all this time? As it turns out, they weren't here just to apologize. They had an ulterior motive. They told me they were in talks with a big investor for their catering business, and they needed my help. Apparently, this investor's son was trying to get into Caltech, and my parents had bragged about me getting accepted. Now, the investor wanted me to meet his son and give him some advice. My parents were desperate. They needed this deal, and they were willing to do anything to get it, even if it meant swallowing their pride and coming to me for help. They offered to pay double my remaining college expenses if I would just go to this party and say nice things about them to the investor. It was tempting. The money would have been helpful. All I had to do was lie and say that my parents were supportive and loving, that they had always had my back. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand there and pretend that everything was fine, that they hadn't betrayed me. So I agreed to go to the party, but I had a different plan in mind. When we got there, my parents introduced me to the investor, and I decided to tell him the truth. I told him how my parents had cut me off because I refused to sacrifice my future for my brother's sake. I told him how they had promised to pay for my college for years, only to turn their backs on me when it mattered most. The investor was shocked, as were the other guests. My parents were mortified, and they tried to downplay what I was saying, but it was too late. The damage was done. I had exposed them for what they really were, and there was no going back. After that, I left the party and went back to my dorm. My parents have been trying to contact me ever since, but I've been ignoring them. They're angry, of course. They're blaming me for ruining their deal. But I don't care. They deserved it for what they did to me. But not everyone saw it that way. When I told my uncle what I had done, I expected him to laugh, to be proud of me for standing up to my parents. But he wasn't. He said I had gone too far, that I should have just told them I didn't want to help and left it at that. He was disappointed in me, and that hurt more than anything my parents had ever done. I tried to explain to him why I did it, how hurt I had been, how I needed to show my parents that they couldn't treat me like that. But he didn't understand. He said that revenge wasn't the way to go, that it wouldn't make me feel better in the long run. I knew he was right, but I couldn't help the way I felt. I was angry, and I wanted my parents to feel the pain they had caused me. Eventually, we made up. My uncle said he still supported me, even if he didn't agree with what I had done. He told me that he would always be there for me, no matter what, and that meant a lot. But I could tell that something had changed between us. There was a distance now, and I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same. A few days later, my parents showed up at my college again. This time, they brought Jared with them. I hadn't seen him in a year, and I was surprised at how much he had changed. He had clearly been working out, and he looked a lot bigger, more intimidating. Couldn't help but wonder if they had brought him along to try and scare me into doing what they wanted. They took me to a diner near campus, and once again, they tried to convince me to retract what I had said at the party. They told me that the investor had stopped returning their calls and that their business was in jeopardy because of me. They even tried to bribe me again, offering me more money if I would just post an apology on social media. I refused. I wasn't going to lie for them, no matter how much they offered. That's when my father lost his temper. He slammed his fist on the table, demanding that I do what they asked. I stood my ground, telling them that I didn't owe them anything. They had given up their right to tell me what to do when they abandoned me. My mother tried to play the guilt card, saying they had raised me, and this was how I repaid them. But I wasn't having any of it. I reminded them that they had always favored Jared. They had never treated me like they did him. They had always put his needs above mine, and I was done letting them control my life. After that, I walked out. I told them that if they ever tried to contact me again, I would file a restraining order. I wasn't going to let them bully me anymore. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it. As I walked back to my dorm, I felt a sense of relief. I had finally stood up to my parents and told them how I felt. It wasn't easy, and I knew there would be consequences, but I didn't care. I was done being their pawn. Since then, my parents haven't tried to contact me again. My uncle and I are still close, though things are a bit strained between us. I know he doesn't approve of how I handled things, but he still supports me, and that's what matters. As for Jared, I have no idea what he's up to. I don't care either. I'm focused on my future, and I'm not going to let my family hold me back. I'm going to graduate from Caltech, get a job, and build a life for myself without them. It's not easy being on my own, but I'm stronger for it. I've learned that I can't rely on anyone but myself, and that's okay. I don't need my parents' approval or their money. I'm going to make it on my own, and I'm going to prove to them that they were wrong to doubt me. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. My parents needed to hear the truth, even if it hurt them. Maybe someday they'll realize how wrong they were. But even if they don't, I'm okay with that. I'm done living in their shadow. My time to shine. If you like this story, you can support the author who plays Minecraft in the background. Like and subscribe to the channel.